motorbike to be able to actually go and actively prevent the species being poached or a protected area being destroyed. What we also provide a lot of support for is awareness work and local education. Again, depending on the circumstance and the species involved, very often the local communities have to be on board. They have to understand that the species nearby is threatened for whatever reason it might be it habitat destruction, overfishing, or other reasons, poaching particularly. We have found that we try not to have too many criteria. We try to be very open-minded and flexible. Our philosophy very much is anyone can submit an application to us. Important to us is to get the money out. However, as I'll show you later, we have had far more applications than we can support, as a result of which we do have a couple of criteria, which is that we provide grants to the more endangered species, using the red list as a guide, and those which are not known, data deficient or potentially not listed. Often that's the case with some of the taxa which don't often receive grants. Which brings me on to the next point, which is that we don't have any bias in terms of taxonomic groups. So we don't focus only on mammals or only on fish. We cover everything, from elephants to fungi. We provide grants for small crayfish here in Australia, for example, up in Queensland, or even sea cucumber up in the Coral Sea. We are very, very flexible in that sense. This means that a lot of the species which we do provide grants to are less known. Again, the fungi, the invertebrates, a lot of the plants are not yet listed, a lot of them, a lot of the invertebrates are data deficient. We are in a position where we can provide grants for that work. Again, that can often help support AZE work further down the line in the establishment of protected areas. You need that information of where a species lives, how many there are, what ranges they have, in order to support protected areas work. So we try to keep flexible, we try to be fairly nimble. We have quite a short, we believe, application time. We have quite a short application in itself. The mandate from the Crown Prince, from the patron, let's say, of the fund, is that we would rather get the money out there, even if it's a little bit of a risk, rather than risk not having it there and risk a species potentially going extinct. It is, as I say, quite a quick review process, but also we want to be fairly thorough, as much as is reasonable. We're not throwing our money away. And so we do have an independent advisory board. We meet 3 times a year. I'm delighted to say that Mike Parr here is a member of that advisory board, and so we do get the AZE influence there as well, let's say. Yes, and so we do try to get those grants out 3 times a year. We also have on the advisory board an amphibian specialist, an ichthyologist. Mike covers the ornithology as well. And also, I'd just like to mention that the fund is not a sinking fund. This means that we do spend from the interest that we earn on the endowment. This fluctuates obviously a little bit. We started very well. The endowment started April 2009, which was particularly lucky. But nonetheless, not every year is that good. So the fund is really quite competitive. We found that we can obviously support far fewer applications than we would like. There are too many applications coming in for fantastic projects, for really good work, that we sadly have to turn down. Just to give you a little idea of roughly how this works, right at the beginning, 2009, a lot of people got their grants. We had relatively few applications. That has now changed. So if you look at 2013, about 1,500 applications and almost 200 grants provided. Again, these are all small amounts of money, maximum of $25,000. The vast majority are far less than $25,000. It's pretty competitive. To put that, say those numbers, put them into dollar amounts. Again, you can see 2013, I mentioned about 1,500 grants applications, about $28 million asked for, and we spent $1.6 million. We try to keep ourselves to about $1.5 million, but sometimes there are an awful lot of really good projects out there, so we kind of get tempted to spend a little bit more. As you can see, the success rate there is really quite small, as is the grant size. So in 2013, average grant size only just over $8,000. It's really not an awful lot, but it is amazing how far a few $1,000s can go in some of the biodiverse rich parts of the world, particularly in the tropics, developing countries. It's not going to go an awfully long way in the US or Australia or Europe, usually, although it's amazing how far some $1,000s can go here too. But really where we feel it makes a big, big difference in the developing countries, where someone does just need a few $1,000s to really go and essentially indulge in their passion of making sure that that species does not go extinct. Very quick overview of some of the grants that we have provided. As you can see up in the top right, we've provided just a bit over 1,100 grants to $11.3 million total. I mentioned earlier that we cover all taxonomic groups. Naturally, and I think unsurprisingly, the mammals dominate. As you can see, almost $5 million for 146 grants. Projects which we support, grants which we give, reflect the applications we receive. The mammal conservation community has been around far longer than the fungi guys or the invertebrate guys. The bird conservation community is fairly well developed as well. And so, as you can see, the next largest group is the birds, with 189 applications, grants awarded. But I'm pretty proud of the fact that we've given $158,000 to fungi conservation work. Some of that has been helping a couple of the specialist groups get up and running. But quite a significant amount of that has been on really on-the-ground fungus conservation work, which really does exist impressively. I'm also quite impressed with $430,000 for invertebrate conservation. I think it's pretty good. I mentioned earlier on a couple of crayfish which we've supported in Queensland, and a sea cucumber off the coast in the Coral Sea, right up in northern Australia. Just a very quick overview of grants by continent. I mentioned earlier on we have absolutely no geographical bias. Again, you can see though in Europe there's only 42 grants. The kind of money that we provide just doesn't go quite as far in developed countries in Europe. And to be honest, the need is probably greater in the developing countries with rich biodiversity around the tropics. You can see that Asia and Africa dominate grants there. I mentioned earlier on that we use the IUCN Red List as a guide. It's not really criteria as such, we use it as a guide. We try to take into account the importance of subspecies and the importance of local populations of species. But again, the vast majority critically endangered and endangered. Again, I'm quite proud of the fact that we have quite a few projects supporting work with data deficient, not listed species. We've been pretty broad. We've covered a very large range of different species. So out of those roughly 1,100 grants, about 819 different species and subspecies which have received grants. In some taxonomic groups, there are repeats, particularly in the mammals. But for example, in the plants, almost every single grant we've given for plant work is for an entirely different species from any other grant. So, and that's just quite an interesting set of numbers. But what we really care about most is supporting the passion and the dedication of people who go out in the field, get their hands dirty, making sure that their species doesn't go extinct. And that again is something where we feel that basic early support, providing baseline data, providing basic support to the work in the field, really helps towards protecting, developing, and helping protected areas and AZE sites around the world. And so with that, I will leave it back to Mike again, and if any questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicolas. So by now, hopefully you're getting the impression that we're going to take a really can-do approach to this extinction crisis. We've developed a methodology identifying where all these species are. We've got a philosophy of not letting any of them go extinct. And we started with 2 programs that offer financing to, in the case of Nicolas, any species from any taxa, EN or CR, and certainly that can help AZE sites. So we'll let you know that there's money here, and we can do this. And with IUCN Netherlands, there's another program that can finance these types of projects. So I'm now going to turn it over to a couple of folks who are working more in the practitioner end. And could you bring up the next PowerPoint, please? I think it's Robin next, is that right? Yes, indeed it is. So I'll turn it over to Robin, and who's going to talk a little bit about amphibians and AZE.
Okay, thanks Mike, and good afternoon everyone. So I'm going to focus on amphibians and what we, the Amphibian Survival Alliance, are doing around the world to target and protect amphibians, specifically in AZE sites. So just to set the context, amphibians are the most... Wow, okay. Seems a bit of a lag, it's jumping ahead.
Opposite problems than what I had.
Can you set it back from there?
The gentleman there may be able to help us with that.
Can you get it back to the beginning? It seems to be running through. Well, that was my presentation. Hope you enjoyed it. Okay, I think there's a bit of lag. I'm just going to press it once and hope it goes on to the next slide here. Can you advance it from there if I just tell you? It might be easier. Okay, so just to set the context, so amphibians are the most threatened group. Oh, okay, it's going through. Maybe it's set on a timer. So a third of amphibians are classified as threatened. Okay, it's got a mind of its own. And a quarter are data deficient. The IUCN currently estimates about half of over 7,000 known species of amphibian are threatened with extinction. This is a higher proportion than any other group. 9 out of 10 of those threatened amphibians are threatened by habitat loss. So habitat loss is the #1 threat to amphibian survival in the long term. And one of our main approaches, therefore, is to address that threat. We've got the next. This is produced after AZ came out. This is amphibian AZ sites around the world. Red is not protected, green is protected. And as you can see, we realized we had some work to do. A lot of the amphibians fall through the gaps in protected areas, having very small home ranges. And over half of AZE trigger species are actually amphibians. So the amphibians make up most of amphibian trigger species in most of the AZE sites. Next slide. So in response to this threat and the lack of a real sort of global body addressing threats to amphibians, and specifically the threat of habitat loss to amphibians, the Amphibian Survival Alliance was formed about 3 years ago, and it's over 100 partners now. It's the largest global partnership for amphibian conservation, and the idea is really for it to be an umbrella body to leverage resources and rise to the challenge of trying to protect amphibian habitats around the world. Next slide. So the Amphibian Specialist Group of the IUCN provides scientific underpinning. There's over 400 experts around the world, amphibian experts, that we use to inform and advise us. So it helps us to sort of ground truth the situation on the ground. So we use the global analyses, and we really try to sort of ground truth to make sure it reflects the situation on the ground. Next slide. So really in response to the need to protect amphibian habitats, we set up a mechanism called the Leapfrog Conservation Fund, with really 4 sort of founding partners: Amphibian Survival Alliance, Rainforest Trust, Global Wildlife Conservation, and then your Sabin Family Foundation, with the goal of trying to leverage other resources to direct them to protecting critical amphibians for critical habitat for amphibians around the world. Next slide. One example of an approach that we have taken, and this is really sort of building on a track record of prioritizing and trying to protect amphibians. And Sierra Coral in Guatemala is one AZE site that was identified as a priority for conservation in Guatemala. Next slide. It's right here where the frog is, right on the border of Guatemala and Honduras. Next slide. It's a tract of beautiful and intact rainforest. Next slide. With the top 2 are AZE amphibians. So we've got a couple of AZE salamanders, and then below are a couple of other species. The one on the left is critically endangered, they're also within the same habitat. Next slide. But an imminent threat to the area from clearing and cattle ranching. So we convened 19 different partners, supporters, came together to leverage the funding needed to empower the local NGO Funda Eco to actually acquire this area and set up a new protected area. Next slide. And the outcome is a 47,000 acre national protected area was declared to protect this forest and its inhabitants. Next slide. So there should be a map there that shows, okay, there should be a map on the previous one. This is what's next. So yeah, the previous map. So there should be a map here showing what sites we're actually working on now. I put this together on a Mac, so I guess the PC doesn't like it. But I could just talk about then a couple of our big upcoming projects. If you go on to the next one. Next slide, please. So, building on the success of the Sierra Coral, where we're taking that model and we've identified another AZE site, the Cuchimatanes Mountains in northern Guatemala, northwest. Next slide. I got to go there in July just to visit the area, some beautiful cloud forest. Next slide. And home to, this is one of the AZE amphibians. It disappeared for 32 years before being rediscovered, which also highlights the importance of ground truthing, just to validate that these species are still there. Many amphibians have not been seen in years or decades, so it's important also to verify if these sites are still important, if these species are still there. Next slide. And this is the other AZE species, the little tree frog. Next slide. And this area is also habitat for some other incredible species. This is the long-limbed salamander, Nicolas pernix. It's not an AZE because it occurs in a couple of different sites, but it's highly threatened. Next slide. And here it is, and it's the rainforest habitat. Cloud forest up there in the Cuchimatanes. Really incredible animal. Next slide. Another threatened amphibian species from the area. So using the AZE, we really target these areas. We home in on the sort of tip of the iceberg in terms of priorities for conservation. And in doing so, we're protecting a whole range of other threatened species. Next slide. This is a species that was just discovered and described in 2012. Will likely qualify for AZE once it's described, its status is attributed, because it likely only occurs here. Next slide. So we're currently working on an opportunity to protect this area. It's 2,000 acres of cloud forest habitat that the local NGO has negotiated with landowners and communities to acquire and protect it. So we're currently in the process of trying to fundraise $680,000 to make that happen. And again, we're using the Leapfrog Conservation Fund to try and get matching leverage support. Next slide. So anyone who's familiar with the AZD is probably familiar with the Massif de la Hotte in Haiti. When the AZD first came out, when the paper was published in 2005, this was the #1 site in the world for AZD species. At that time, it had 13 amphibians, critically endangered or endangered amphibians found nowhere else. That's now 17. And so we've been sort of targeting this area for quite some time, because it was highlighted as the most important site for amphibian conservation. We felt a sort of obligation to try and see what we could do. Next slide. And contrary to popular or common belief, even within Haiti, there is still some beautiful forest. This is cloud forest in the Massif de la Hotte, these tree ferns. So there is still habitat there worth saving. We did an expedition there in 2010. Next slide. And we found 6 frogs that hadn't been seen in 20 years, 6 AZE amphibians that hadn't been seen in 20 years, including this. You can probably see why that hadn't been seen in a while. One of the smallest frogs in the world. Next slide. And just another AZE frog that was rediscovered. So this ground truthing is important just to validate again that these species are there. So we confirmed that this was still a priority site for amphibian conservation. Next slide. And we've also been working with the communities. What I realized when I started going to Haiti was that there's a very negative perception towards frogs, as there is in many parts of the world. They think that they pee in your eye and make you blind. So it's important to sort of work within that local context and try and change perceptions. So we set up a program called Frame of Mind, working with young Haitians to sort of teach them about amphibians and conservation in general. And next slide. Basically using cameras, we gave each of the kids cameras, we taught them how to use them, taught them how to tell stories about conservation that were relevant to their lives. So talking about charcoal, talking about fresh water. And we produced this book that we distributed to the kids. We're working on distributing it to schools for environmental education. We had a photo exhibit where the family, the decision makers, the environment minister for the region came. And he was challenged by an 11-year-old girl on his reforestation policy for the national park. So it was quite a powerful conduit for getting the environmental message out there. And next slide. This is one story put together by one of the children about the charcoal. So just looking at where their charcoal comes from, its uses, and the impact it has on the environment, just to get them understanding the sort of consequences of deforestation and the impact it has on their lives. Next slide. And we went back 6 months later just to ask the kids what they'd got out of it, and they'd got them all thinking about conservation. Thankfully, one on the bottom right said it got her thinking about protecting frogs, so that was the main thing. Next slide. So over the last 4 years, expeditions have been going out to try and identify priority sites for conservation in Haiti, specifically the Massif de la Hotte, but also other areas. So taking the AZE and trying to identify opportunity to where the priority habitats that these frogs are occurring in. Next slide. And we now have a map of 12 different sites where sort of priority meets opportunity. So these are areas that have been identified that are sort of imminent priorities for conservation in Haiti, for site-level conservation if we want to protect Haiti's biodiversity. And next slide. This is the #1, Montbrambois in the Massif de la Hotte. Still has a nice tract of forest, has a number of amphibians, AZE, and 2 brand new species, which likely only live on this mountaintop. So once they're described, once their status is assessed, they will also be likely AZE species. Next slide. This is one frog that occurs there, a beautiful little frog with red eyes, AZE frog. Next slide. And now we're looking at an opportunity to establish the first ever network of private protected areas in Haiti. So, similar to this ICM Netherlands approach, where much of our work is enabling local NGOs to acquire and protect land. You know, amphibians often occur in very small tracts of habitats. It's really an opportunity to get bang for the buck in terms of protecting small tract of land with high biodiversity and highly threatened species. So we actually have land titles notarized for the first site, Grand Bois, 1,000 acres, and we have a $1 million commitment to start leveraging to set up this first ever network of private protected areas. So as we go forward, we're looking for additional partners and supporters to really try and help us leverage this and ultimately hopefully set up a trust fund for Haiti that will enable them to, the local partners for Société Audubon Haiti to protect and manage these areas that are outside of the current protected areas in Haiti. Okay, thank you.
So it turns out they didn't all go extinct, and you can do conservation for these species, even in places that a lot of people seem to think are among the more difficult places to work. And we can get it done, it turns out. But you need to take it on and try it. And if you do, great things happen, as Robin's just told us. So could you please put up the next PowerPoint? And I think it is Tony. I hope this one will behave. So as you saw, amphibians up until the last few years were perhaps considered amongst the more neglected groups of vertebrates. Fortunately, things are really turning around for amphibians, thanks to the work that Robin and others are doing. But now we're going to go on to another group of species which maybe are still more neglected, and Tony's going to talk to us about some of the invertebrates, particularly linked to limestone systems.
Yeah, it's working, yes it is. Okay, so guys, what is it about size? The IG targets encourage it. Mine's bigger than yours. You know, I've got the big one in Hawaii, but I've got the Greenland one. I'm from Sanjiangyuan in China with 360,000 kilometers. Big is good, big is great. But I want to make an appeal for the little bits that aren't protected, that will never become national nature reserves, and in particular, as Mike just said, next line. I want to talk about limestone systems. I want to talk about the isolated limestone towers. I want to talk about caves. So, I get lots of people coming to me saying, Tony, can we just have a layer of limestone and we'll put it on our maps, WCMC for one. It's not as easy as that. There is no good limestone layer. People make attempts. This is from the University of Auckland, and it's a carbonate map. And you can see that clearly the quality is different in different places in Africa. Carbonate, believe it or not, well, believe this or not, occurs in great big lumpy bits, and in Asia it occurs in little tiddly bits. And when you actually look at the map in detail, you find that the pixel size is really quite coarse. And by the time you want to get down to Peninsula Malaysia, which is what I'm going to be talking quite a lot about now, it's kind of useless. There's a group in Malaysia who part-time, because there's no money in limestone, have compared this to the geology map of Malaysia and then compared it to their analysis on the ground of where the limestone hills are. And I would believe the on-the-ground one, using Google Earth, and these others don't really bear any relation to fact, and anyway are very coarse. This is an example. This is a place called Gunung Kantang in the west side of the peninsula, and it's a cement quarry. Lafarge, based in Paris, is in control of that. And it's a single block of limestone, fairly isolated, and as you can see, much of it is in fact a quarry. And the intention is, with the exception of one small bit for reasons of ownership and concessions which don't need to concern us, the idea is to remove it and go beyond ground level, go beyond. If you look in the red list release that went public about 19 minutes ago, you'll see that there's a species of snail which is extinct. Its single limestone hill is now a pond, and all that could be called hill has vanished, and so has the snail, which was found only on that thing. So there we've got this entire limestone hill is 130 hectares. And you can see from that that a lot of that is actually bare rock being blown apart by Lafarge. The good news is, well, the amazing news is, this is a list of recently discovered, they don't have vernacular names yet, of all the endemic birds and mammals found on that hill. It's just a remarkable place. They have that degree of endemism. I don't know of anywhere else that's got that much vertebrate endemicity. It's just amazing. Of course, I'm lying through my teeth. It's just the other stuff. It's the stuff. The top three are snails. You can see the third one there. I don't know if you saw it in the news on Mongabay and places that we named a snail down up the north of the hill after Lafarge, quoting all the wonderful things they say about how they're going to just do good things for biodiversity and how they love it. So now they have the choice to either make it go extinct or to conserve it. The fourth one is the most remarkable spider. It lived around the time of the dinosaurs. It's got a segmented abdomen, and for the archaeologists among you, you'll know how significant that is. The fifth one is a cave-adapted gecko. Cool. Very long legs, big eye. The next one, the Vatican, is a tree, a dipracarp tree found only on this hill. The next one is a small herb, and the last one is a small tree. Three of them have been assessed. Hardly surprising they're going to be CR. And if Lafarge continue, they will soon become extinct. Now, this is the sort of stuff we're talking about. This is sort of typical of limestone systems. It's your whip spiders, blind, elongated beetles, white millipedes. I know it's hard to get excited, but they are incredibly rare at the best of times and easily threatened. Wood lice, pseudoscorpions, and on the outside of the hills you have these wonderful snails with forms and colours even that really expand your opinion and perception of what snails can be. Snails that seem to be going around towards the left very happily, and then at some point they decide to go right and look over their shoulder. I don't know why they do it. There's one exception here which actually isn't a concern in this context, and that's the bat.